Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getida that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getida collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getida.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you? Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Steve Anderson. Steve is the author of the best-selling book, The Bezos Letters, where he deconstructs Jeff Bezos' 21 letters to Amazon share owners through his unique lens of risk. He provides listeners with a guide on key takeaways and principles that Bezos leveraged in turning an online bookstore into a trillion-dollar company in just over 2 decades. The 4 cycles, test, build, accelerate, and scale, along with the 14 principles, can help any business grow like Amazon. Very excited to have Steve on the show today. Welcome, Steve.
Yeah, and David, thank you so much for having me, for both of you.
Absolutely. So to start things off, can you share with the listeners a little bit about your background and the path that led you to writing the Bezos Letters?
Sure, be happy to. A little unusual, actually. I come out of the insurance industry, have been part of that for my entire career. And the last 25, 30 years of that has been focused on technology for that. Independent agents is my niche within the wide world of insurance, helping them with technology and embracing it and figuring out what works for them, et cetera. And that's really kind of what led to the question I started asking, which is, with technology developing so rapidly, it has for many years, continues to do so. In fact, we might have seen over the last year or so a further acceleration of some of those changes. But I started asking the question, is the biggest risk an agency face actually not taking enough risk? And I expanded that out to businesses now, because I believe that's the same issue or question that they need to be asking. Businesses 20 years ago could sit back for a few years and kind of look and see how things were working out. They don't have the luxury of that anymore. So I started researching companies that had once been very successful and are no longer here. Why? And those companies that are successful continue to be successful, and why? What are the differences? In that process, came across Amazon. I kind of say now, of course, as an example of a successful company and continued to be successful. But even further in my research, I started reading the letters to shareholders that Jeff Bezos wrote. And, letters to shareholders for public companies and CEOs typically are boring. They're pitch fest for how great the company is. And what attracted me with Bezos is he did some of that, but a lot of it that he wrote in the letter was how he was doing it, how he was growing Amazon, how to think about business and growth, and kind of that lens that I have with risk, because, taking more risk is counterintuitive to the industry. We're all about, shifting risk, mitigating risk, getting rid of risk, not getting more. But I believe Jeff Bezos, and I call him this in the book, is the master of risk. And so as I examined all those letters, I realized there were threads that were pretty consistent going through over the years. And that's what led me to actually that my first iteration was what I called a 1-page executive summary for each of the letters that had been published so far. Highlights, couple quotes, some key takeaways. Fortunately, my wife is in the publishing business, and I showed it to her. I was pretty excited about it. I thought there was some really good stuff there. And she said, that's not a white paper, that's a book. So that started a whole journey of putting all of that into what was eventually published as the Bezos Letters.
Awesome. Well, yeah, glad to have you on the show, Steve. I'm excited to kind of dig in here and dissect what you spent a lot of time forming. And so to kick it off, why is Bezos the master of risk? And how can you know when you're taking too much risk or not enough? What is that pivot there?
That whole concept of Bezos being the master of risk really grew out of what he talked a lot about in the letters, which is the culture at Amazon of experimenting. And what he said was, you need to experiment to figure out what's going to work. And if you're going to experiment, you're going to fail. Because if you have an experiment and you know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. And so built into the culture at Amazon is not even a willingness, but an encouragement to try new things, knowing that actually most ideas don't work, but it's the ones that do that drive business growth. And so that's why in the test cycle, the first principle is encourage successful failure. And Amazon has had a lot of those over the years where they tried something, failed, but then the results of what they learned in that failure grew into multi-billion-dollar products.
Very nice. Very nice. Now, in your book, you talk a lot about being a customer obsessed business as opposed to not just being customer focused. Can you dive into that and talk about why that's so important?
Yeah, so I'm going to a little history. So in the Bezos' very first letter, 1997, so they went public in 97. First letter came out early 98. And he really talked about several things in that letter, one of which was they will obsess over customers at Amazon. And he talks about that throughout letters. So this, again, is one of those threads that goes through the letters. And even today, when I talk about it, it conjures up a different mindset than a customer journey, a customer focus, a customer service, right? Every business that starts knows they have to take care of customers or they won't be in business long. But what's the difference between that and obsessing over customers? And I think at Amazon, that idea of the customer, and it's not even the idea that customers are always right, because customers don't know what they want or need until they learn about what they couldn't live without. Literally, so here's an example. I literally, just before we started, had got an email from Amazon. I'm a Prime member. I kind of think it's like foolish not to be one, but, people don't always agree with me on that. But a Prime member, and the email was announcing that a new benefit of being a Prime subscriber is delivery-free Grubhub. So they have partnered with Grubhub. And I've not used it, so I don't know exactly how it works, but evidently there's a fee for somebody, going and picking up and then bringing it. And they have a partnership now where that, as an Amazon Prime member, you don't pay that delivery fee. Well, did customers at Amazon clamor for having them do that? No, probably not. But if you're customer obsessed, your customers' wants, needs, and desires so deeply that you can, and again, this is a Bezos phrase, you can invent on their behalf. So somebody figured out that this could be and they actually had a test. They tested it out, which is another experiment, right? They didn't fully commit until they figured out, but they must have figured out that this added another layer or another reason not to unsubscribe from Prime. There are already so many. Why do they need another? Because if it's better for the customer, it'll ultimately be better for Amazon. And I think that mindset is what sets obsession apart from service, journey, focus.
When you think about propaganda, you probably think about Kim Jong-un and his funny little haircut. And you'd be exactly right. The podcast, This Is Propaganda, doesn't want you to believe that. They want you to question the ads you see, the news you read, the brands you love. What they don't want you to question is that they are advertisers themselves, peddling the same tricks they claim you fall for to make a living. If you need something to boycott, look no further than this show. Don't listen to This Is Propaganda.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it probably didn't add much to Amazon's bottom line. It was probably an amazing partnership with Grubhub just to kind of pop in there and be like, oh, yeah, let's do that. They're going to lose some money on the tail end of it, but they're going to get a ton of exposure and a ton of revenue to grow. And so that's,
Right.
I'm a Prime member. I didn't know about that. I don't use Grubhub either. My kids do, but I don't. So that's interesting that
Ken, that might be showing our age. I don't know.
I know. Yeah, I'm definitely showing my age. So maybe I need to use it. I don't know. I like to go pick my food up, but you know,
I actually, so I will tell you, side note, we can edit this out if we need, but I believe the food's hotter and better if you go pick it up than you wait for someone to go get it and deliver it to you. So
yeah,
if it's close enough, I much prefer going to get it. But
yeah, same. So no, that's interesting. And yeah, they're always like adding that other level just to kind of go above and beyond, make customers happy. And yeah, it's pretty incredible. I'd like to go over the 4 cycles. Can you share with the audience, you went over a little bit on the testing. Can you explain the 4 cycles and kind of at a high level of each one?
Yes. So I believe every business, regardless of size, regardless of how long they've been in business, are going through these different cycles pretty much all the time. So they're testing new ideas, new ways of doing things, streamlining their interaction with customers, providing better products, and they're figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And there are 3 principles in that particular cycle. Accelerate is they're getting some success. So how do we accelerate that success to, again, accelerate growth? And again, 3 principles in that cycle. Excuse me, I said accelerate next. So I'm not even talking about it the right way. Oh my gosh.
Hey,
second cycle.
Yeah, no worries.
The second cycle is build. So test first, what's going to work. Build, we build on the successes that we had and actually build on the failures too. I'd like to talk about that at some point, but you build. And so again, 3 principles there. And then continued success, you accelerate that growth and then you scale. And part of what happens is for a lot of businesses, they scale, but what happens is they start protecting what got them there, not looking for the next thing. A phrase I use quite a bit is that invention is more important than innovation. So everything you hear in the business press is about companies need to innovate. Well, that's sort of the innovator's dilemma. Chris Christensen, the idea that if you're not inventing something new, you can only innovate or iterate so often before the world shifts and you're all of a sudden irrelevant. That's, again, what Amazon, what Bezos would say, that's a day 2 company, a day 2 mindset shift. So you have to keep these cycles going in order to continue to be growing. And again, look at Amazon. So again, we all know the founder story, which I think is reasonably true, but started with books. He never intended to stay with books. He started with books because it could have the biggest impact with the internet. He could have a bookstore with an unlimited shelf space, where the biggest box stores at the time, and really still today, might have 150 to 175,000 books in inventory. But at Amazon, they have every book ever published. And even when they first started out, even rare books, I mean, they did a whole lot of things. But he always had in his mind adding other stores to that, and video and DVDs and some of the early stores were part of how then Amazon grew.
Okay. One follow-up, and I just want to highlight a point that you made, Steve, and David and I have, kind of fallen victim to this in our own companies. And what I think you had mentioned is like bread and butter. Like when a company has something that's working, they kind of, or maybe they'll test a few other things and do a few other things, but they always kind of go back to like what was their bread and butter and what's working, instead of like moving forward and inventing and scaling out that way. So this is an interesting concept. Now, you mentioned you wanted to cover some of the failures in there. I really like talking about failures. I think we learn the most from when we talk about those. Can you hit on those a little bit?
I want to ask you, what do you think are some of Amazon's biggest failures? I know I have my favorite ones, but.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There was a device that they created. It just never took. It's slipping my mind. The name of the device.
The Fire Phone.
Yeah, the Fire Phone. That was probably the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, 2014. So it was a Bezos' pet project. He decided Amazon needed to have a phone. I don't know why. if I ever get to ask him, that's one of the questions. Why did you think we needed a phone? We had iPhones were already out 7 years, 2007. We already had Android phones. And the Amazon phone maybe really wasn't that much better. It made shopping on Amazon a little easier, but who's going to buy a phone just to shop on Amazon? So anyway, he pushed it out, big announcement, nothing. And that 2014, by the end of 2014, they wrote off $280 million in inventory and development costs. Literally, they sold it for a penny and they couldn't give it away.
Yeah.
And so that's the failure. Pretty big one. And you could point to some other ones. But here's the success coming out of the failure. Amazon had to learn about voice processing to develop the phone. They had to learn about how to take voice in, how to do things, right? Just phones, typical phone stuff. They had to learn how to do that. Well, 4 months after he announced the Fire Phone, he got his first demonstration for a cylinder that you could talk to. We now know it as
Alexa.
the Echo. Yeah,
Or Echo,
Alexa as the machine learning software that powers the device called Echo. And again, successful, but even now, there are some, I guess, rumblings of Echo's losing a lot of money and Alexa because what they thought it would allow is people to shop easier, and it hasn't fulfilled that original purpose. So we'll see what happens, but that's another principle is that they think long-term. I mean, it's been around a long time. They keep trying to figure out how can we do it. The other one that immediately comes to mind is just all the physical stores. And in fact, he talks about in one of his letters, I remember what year it was now, I think 2016, he talks about, we get asked when we're going to open physical stores. And he said, not yet. We haven't figured out how to have this is a really good phrase I like a lot, a meaningful differentiation experience for the customer in a retail store. And they've tried all kinds of things, like, the just walk out technology. So, literally there is no checkout. You're monitored by what you pick off the shelves, et cetera. They tried to scale that into grocery stores, didn't work out so well, expensive. And so they've closed all of their retail stores except for the grocery stores. And they're iterating, experimenting, inventing in the grocery space because there's such a large opportunity there. They think they can have some impact.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It was interesting when you posed the question of their failures. I really had to rack my brain because I have been getting a very positive customer experience for a long time. But yeah, the phone, when Ken mentioned the phone.
Definitely was. Yep. That's the one I highlight in the book, but that's definitely one. And they've had a lot of other ones. And in fact, part of what I look at now is when I hear an announcement of Amazon shutting something down, closing a store, closing a product line, then my question is, what have they been learning that they're going to pivot and do something else with? So what immediately comes to mind is pharmacy, healthcare, and grocery. So really big industries. And what people don't seem to get with Amazon, and I said it before, they have a long-term thinking mindset. They think multiple years into the future, and they're willing to invest. Now, I suspect, I'm going to pause here, I suspect some people listening are going, yeah, but they got billions of dollars. Of course they can. Well, they didn't at the beginning. And it's that mindset that they continue, which actually is a really interesting, study or thought process, or how has Amazon scaled to where they have and still maintained their culture and their ideals? And that's a really, to me, really interesting lesson that I think people can take.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. And it's been, I definitely agree with that. So one thing I want to talk about is Jeff Bezos' decision-making, his high-velocity decision-making, and how he uses that when he's growing his business.
So for Bezos, there are two types of decisions, and not very creatively calls them type 1 and type 2. We can think of something better, but anyway, So type 1 decisions he describes as bet the company decisions. They're really big, they're really consequential, and those types of decisions should be made by the highest level, whatever that means in your company, and with as much information as you can possibly get, and probably ends up being a gut feel. And so I would say a type 1 decision for Amazon might have been picking a second headquarters. If you remember all of that, right? They had a contest in all kinds of cities for bidding, and giving them, tax breaks and all kinds of stuff because it would be an economic boom. So big decision. They took a long time, lots of data. Part of what's interesting, though, if you remember, they picked New York City, the Bronx, I think, area, and after they announced significant pushback politically from New York.
Yeah.
And so I'd have to look up now. It went on for a number of weeks. They finally announced, we changed our mind. We're not going to go someplace where we're not wanted. And so they doubled down on their Arlington, Virginia location just outside Washington, D.C. And actually Nashville, where I'm from, they put in a operations center, like 5,000 plus employees here that they've brought in away from the West Coast in Seattle, et cetera. So that's a type 1 decision is my point here.
Yeah.
So type 2 are decisions that are more easily reversible. And he says those types of decisions should be made by the lowest group in the company that is capable of making the decision, that has the knowledge, skill, and experience to make the decision. And he said, you should make a decision with at most 70% of the information you wish you had, meaning you're not going to get it all. And it really is that move fast. Because again, if we're not afraid of failure, then if we make a decision and determine after that it was the wrong decision, we can pivot, we can do a different direction, or we can just cut it and stop it. So what Bezos says is very few decisions at a company are type 1. Most decisions are type 2. But as a company grows, accelerate and scale, they tend to add bureaucracy to the decision-making process. And you have to go through multiple levels of approval to get something done. And when that happens, that all that does is slow down growth. It slows down your ability to respond to current conditions.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of them broken down like that, but it definitely makes sense. And I'm curious if you mentioned earlier, Steve, that Amazon is very forward thinking. And so I'm curious if they knew they're going to be up against some politicians trying to break them up for a monopoly. I wonder if they said, let's get into DC and let's get our influence going in there before we.
I have no doubt that, those have been rumblings for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised at all. In fact, if you look, their spending on lobbying efforts has increased substantially over the last number of years. So yes, I think that's probably part of that decision process.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's see here. Why you'll never think or grow big enough if you're not willing to risk failure. What do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah, I think that, and again, we've talked a little bit about that. One other aspect I want to add in here is certainly for those listening, this is not stupid risk. This is not who cares. This is not let's throw spaghetti on the wall and see what happens. This is intentional, strategic, thoughtful. So you don't go into something and don't do your due diligence, don't do your work, don't do the research and have the effort. You go into it saying, I need or want this to work, but understanding that no matter what, it's not always going to work right. There's one tool I want to bring out here that I just really like that is a core at Amazon. And it started out as the 6-page memo. It's now called typically what I see is the working backward document. So working backward from the customer to what they want. But Bezos sent an email out to senior leadership team in 2004, long time ago, 20 years ago now that I think about it. And that memo said, no longer will a slide-oriented presentation be allowed in our senior leadership team meetings. No keynote, no PowerPoint, Nothing. Instead, those who are bringing the request for a decision need to physically write out a memo describing the decision, starting with a future press release, meaning on the day this product service that you're proposing we do, this is the press release that goes out. It's customer focused. It's why it benefits the customer, et cetera. And then FAQs. Here are the questions that we think will come up. Here are our answers to them. And then some data and some other things, but a maximum of 6 pages. Here's what Bezos said. He said, 1, executives are busy and people hide behind PowerPoints, bullet points and PowerPoints, meaning they haven't thought through everything. And when you're presenting a slide oriented, people raise their hand for questions. And often you'll say, that's a couple slides down, versus writing everything out, which requires a different level of thinking. If you're going to write something down, and this is, I think, what ultimately attracted me to the letters, is Bezos is a really good writer, and he thinks by writing. And so if somebody has to write that out, they don't send it out before the meeting. They literally print it out on paper, hand it out at the meeting, and the first 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes of the meeting is spent everybody reading the memo. Because here's what Bezos said again. Executives are busy. They say they'll read it before they get there, and they won't. So we'll just make sure everybody's literally on the same page. And one Amazon employee on LinkedIn described this process as magical, because literally everybody's on the same page. They're making notes of questions. So now they're not rehashing what's already there. They're getting into what's not there, or additional questions or disagreement maybe on the decision or the process. So that is a way to mitigate the risk of experimenting. Because if it fails, now you have a document to go back to for an after-action review. And you can say, okay, what didn't we understand that ultimately made this project fail? So now, again, you have another learning opportunity and another way to iterate so you don't do the same thing the next time.
Very nice. Very nice. I think that's really good framework to look at things through. So, well, if people are interested in checking out your book, where can they find it? I have a sneaking suspicion you can find it on Amazon.
You can find it on Amazon. And actually, if there are, any international listeners, it's been translated into 20 different languages. So look on Amazon in different countries and you may be able to find it and get it there. The website for the book is thebezosletters.com, and there's some additional information there that might be helpful. And then my primary social platform is LinkedIn. And so, if you're listening to this, you have additional questions, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to answer some of those questions for you.
Very nice. Well, we'll post links to all that in the show notes. Before we end the episode, we have a list of 4 questions that we ask every guest. We call it the fire round, and I'll kick it over to Ken for the fire round.
Are you ready for the fire round, Steve?
I am.
All right. The first one is going to be funny. What is your favorite book?
Well, I would say mine, but actually I read a lot. So probably the book that had the biggest impact on me in business is The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. A really old book, like 80s, I think, late 80s book, been updated a few times. But just this idea of what is an entrepreneur? Are they having an entrepreneurial seizure, or are they a technician that think they can do it better? And that makes a real difference in how you go about building a business.
Yeah, I really like that book. Next one, what are your hobbies?
My primary hobby is cooking. What I tell people is my wife completely supports my hobby.
I bet. What is your signature dish?
Part of what I like about cooking is I like technique and I like trying new things. So I don't know that I would say the dish that I am asked for most often is kind of one of two. The first is a simple steak. So I like a good ribeye, but the technique I use is called sous vide. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yep.
But it's vacuum sealed in water, and you set the water at the temperature you want your steak, and it can't overcook. And the longer it's held at that temperature, the more tender it becomes. So like a ribeye doesn't need to be held very long, but a flank steak, I've actually cooked a flank steak for 48 hours.
Oh, nice.
And it comes out as a tenderloin and as beefy as a flank. I will tell you, if we have a minute, I got another quick one. So another technique, it's a takeoff on the sous vide. I actually did this weekend for Memorial Day as we're recording this. And I took a pork shoulder, double wrapped it in heavy aluminum foil. I have a thermometer that has 8 different sensors on it. So it measures like the core temperature, the surface temperature, and the ambient temperature. I put it in the oven because it's typically too big to put in a water bath and vacuum seal and all that, and mimicked sous vide. So I call it oven sous vide. So I took the temperature of the oven to 167, which is fork tender pork, and left it in for 23 hours.
Wow.
And it came out great, actually.
Yeah. So we're going to have to move on now because I'm getting hungry. So, all right, last question. What do you think sets apart successful entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
Persistence is what comes to mind. And I'm going to go back to Bezos' long-term thinking. I mean, thinking forward, envisioning what you want to accomplish maybe multiple years down the road, and having the persistence and the discipline to continue working toward those goals.
I like that. I like it a lot. David, over to you to close out the show.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast. If people are interested in getting in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Steve at thebezosletters.com, or as I mentioned earlier, on LinkedIn. Connect with me and we can chat there.
Outstanding. Well, we'll post links to both of those in the show notes. Steve, I want to thank you for your time today and looking forward to staying in touch.
Great. And really appreciate the conversation with both of you.
Thank you. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getida that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getida collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getida.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?